Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, and wow, look at that field center! Is that a Pro Play Games logo? Well, if you're interested in more things that Pro Play Games are up to, you can see me and Simo commentating the Pro Play Tour in Las Vegas, I think tomorrow, by the time this goes up, at twitch.tv/ppgygo, starting at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Enough about the future, let's talk about the present. We are playing a game at my local store against Pendulum. Yes, I am still repping Necroz, the absolute worst deck in the format. In fact, describing it as in the format is a bit of a misnomer. It is scraping the edges of playability with only me as its guide. It's completely screwed. My opponent has won the die roll, which is the most important thing you can do, and I hope if nothing else this set serves as a pleasant reminder for you as to why you should be scooping games you've already lost. My opponent's thinking very hard about what to do with this hand. You can see he's drawn quite well. I believe that's a copy of Duelist Alliance alongside an Allure of Darkness. It looks like he's going to lead with the Alliance, and of course this can get you the one, the only Pendulum Call, one of the very few extremely broken cards left in Pendulum. The issue with Pendulum, and what's going to make it so difficult to ban out when its time finally comes, next list, fingers crossed, isn't that any individual card is extremely powerful, it's that it's an amalgamation of a whole bunch of extremely mutable good stuff. Probably the singular card that does something no other card can do is Pendulum Call. Our opponent is getting the usual suspects here, a Purple Poison Magician followed by a Harmonizing. I wish I lived in Japan, so this card would be at 1. He'll add both to the hand, and from here we can pop off even further. Now, Pendulum Call is extremely powerful on its own, but it's even better when you're pitching a card like Supreme King Dragon Darkworm. This card, when summoned, allows him to add a Gate 0 to the hand, just more material that I will have to chew through. Unfortunately, this build of Necroz is only playing 3 hand traps, 3 Ash Blossom, and while I would have loved to have ashed that Pendulum Call, we did not draw it. We're on 50 cards, which means it's not unreasonable that we find it, but it's also not particularly likely. Next to the field comes the second half of Electromite, a Time Gazer Magician. Note that my opponent has yet to perform a normal summon. That seems fair, right? Electromite, of course, is the glue that is keeping the Pendulum deck together, and if its time comes in the next list, it might be the thing that goes. I would certainly love to see that happen, just because I'm not a big fan of the archetype, but I'd take anything at this point. Electromite, of course, allows my opponent to set any card face up in their extra deck, and then, of course, they can pop a card to swap back and draw an additional card. A really, really powerful set of plays, especially if a Darkworm has given you a 0 that you don't have any intention of using over the course of the turn. He's going to look real quick, and while I didn't get a good look at it, I think he picks Servant here? I can't imagine not. Being able to tutor any Pendulum monster is just such a powerful ability, and Servant is just about the most powerful Pendulum monster you can be selecting. It looks like he's going for Magister. Now, a Magister in the face-up extra deck telegraphs that there's already a Servant that we're going to have to worry about. He will shuffle his deck and set it before shuffling the hand real quickly. I can't exactly see. It looks like he's setting the Gate 0 now. We'll now use the Electromite popping the Gate 0 to add what I expect to be the Magister to hand. There it is. While it's great to have the Magister in hand, you want to be activating it before using all of your draw spells, and there's another one picked up. Oof, 2 Allure of Darkness. That means he'll be able to do it just by setting another scale. Here comes Allure of Darkness number 1, and off the top, what do we find? A Black Fang and a Servant? Incredible. I can't imagine that anything but Black Fang will be the banish here. It looks like he's toying with it, and yep, that's the call. Next, you'll put a counter on this Magister and fire off the Servant for a second one. The follow-up, of course, is the Allure of Darkness. I don't know, a third Allure of Darkness would be about as bad as it gets, and there it is off the top. Ooh, followed up by a card that's even worse for me. Yikes! Alright, let's think real quickly about order. Looks like the first thing he's going to do is activate this card, Spell Power Mastery, which allows him to get a monster that can have a spell counter put on it, I believe, from the deck to the hand, and then puts a spell counter on a card that can have a spell counter put on it. Effectively, it's going to tick up this Servant all the way to 3, enabling either a powerful Pendulum summon followed by a Servant activation, or a Servant activation followed by setting a high scale. Toying with Endymion real quick, and I think it's likely we see that selected. Endymion is probably the worst for me. I know that Pendulum is capable of putting out multiple monster negates, and I'm going to have to chew through them regardless, but my way out of a scenario like that is letting enough monster effects through that either I can overwhelm the number of negates my opponent ends on, or more likely, I can summon exactly Unicore. Unfortunately, Endymion is one of the very few cards that can prevent my ritual spell from being activated in the first place. That might spell doom if they see the kaleidoscope coming. So it looks like they're thinking real quick. Yes, both of them are at 3. It looks like we're going for Servant's Effect first. So Servant will make it onto the field, followed by, please not, Jackal King. I remember when this card first came out, everyone was excited to jam Endymion off of its effect, and then when they realized that they could floodgate Nibiru by getting Jackal King as your 4th summon, ooh, it got so much better. Think, that's 1, 2, and then 3 for the Electromite, 4 for the Servant. The 5th is Jackal King. What are you supposed to do to that? It's so powerful. Next, it looks like we're going to set this copy of Purple Poison, which is going to complete the scale. Magister, of course, is an 8 scale, and Endymion, for what it's worth, is a 7-star monster. How fair is that? So we're going to look real quick at the extra deck. There's a lot to go into. While old Pendulum lists routinely relied on an extreme level of toolboxy power from the extra deck, today's Pendulum lists don't actually have to go into it very often. Things like Jackal King and Endymion are usually enough negates to win the game on their own. You don't have to commit to an overlay into something like an Absolute Dragon and then a fusion summon of Vortex. Instead, you can just sit on some powerful main deck monsters and prevent your opponent's plays from popping off that way. They only go back to the extra deck if they are destroyed. Oh, and a very risky copy of Allure of Darkness, but he rips the copy of Sork. Nice. Follows this up with a copy of, what looks like Terraforming, and here I start freaking out a little bit. I know that some Pendulum builds, though not very frequently, it's more of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro only strategy, will Terraforming for a copy of Secret Village of the Spellcasters. I have basically no way to beat that card, so I'm hoping it's anything else, and thank goodness for me, it's the Endymion field. It's not particularly frightening, but it is a bit of a hassle. It means they're going to be able to recycle all of the spell counters that are taken from their monsters, and unfortunately it likely means that Endymion's going to be using his effect this game, which I do not want to see. So, of course, from here, our opponent can do basically anything. The reliance on main deck monsters means that they fill up their main monster zones pretty frequently, though he does get the harmonizing activation here. Unfortunately for me, they also run out of cards in hand, and routinely I like to see at least one card in the hand so I can activate a Trishula effect. Unfortunately, the Trishula Ritual is not like the Trishula Synchro. You have to have targets for each of them, even though it doesn't. So with a couple of 4s, you can basically overlay into anything you want. They're going to start with a Link summon, and wham! There's Appaloosa. Yikes. Very happy that the Endymion has made its way off the field, but less happy that I now have to chew through what looks to be 4 monster negates and the Evil Swarm Floodgate. Ugh. So when I summon a monster, this Evil Swarm monster can flip it to face-down defense position. It's not that big of a deal for me, but if I ever want to attack over the Appaloosa, it might be a problem. Now, unfortunately, this Magister's effect has not yet been activated, so it will be activated now. That Magister will get back Endymion. I'll read it real quickly. Yeah, it summons a monster from the face-up extra deck, which means that the Endymion that was just used as link material is a viable target. So now I have to get through what appears to be 4 monster negates, 1 spell and trap negate, and the not once per turn flip face down. Can I be double book alongside a spell negate and 4 monsters? Remains to be seen. At the very least, I should be able to prevent myself from dying, provided my opponent isn't trigger happy. So our hand is fine. It's got a couple copies of Preparation of Rites and what looks to be an Incantation Inception. Now, against hands that have multiple pieces of negation out of something like a Pendulum player, Incantation Inception can be an extremely powerful card. It can turn monsters whose effects are negated into additional incantations and fodder. So the first thing we're going to do is probably figure out a way to get Chalice Slime in our hand. That's going to be the most critical card we find because it's going to determine if we can send this Incantation Inception to the graveyard in the first place. We're not really going to get a good opportunity to activate it in order to summon a ritual monster. Unfortunately, the incantation I've drawn is Candle. Now, I really want to be activating Candle's Summon from Deck effect, but I think I'm okay with activating the one from hand as well. My opponent's thinking real quickly. Of course, with 4 negates, it's not very hard to just pull the trigger 4 times, but with an Appaloosa that's already now at 1600 and could be walked over, they might want to be just a little bit more cautious. They're going to think real quick on the preparation of rites. This is likely where the Chalice line will come out, although since I've telegraphed this copy of Incantation Inception, it's also possible that I just go for Necroz's here. I do fetch the Unicore, and from this position, if this copy of Incantation Inception resolves, I should be able to send the negated Candle in order to summon this Necroz of Unicore. Now, unfortunately, my opponent does still have a negation on their side of the field, which may be problematic, so I might need to fetch that out as well. I'm looking over this other copy of Preparation of Rites. Going for bait might be nice, but man. On one hand, I do want to bait the activation of this copy of Endymion, but on the other hand, I really want to just negate its activation by having a Unicore on my side of the field. I am going to go for it, and my opponent's going to think. It's a hard call negating Incantation Inception specifically because putting it in the graveyard is usually quite good for me. He doesn't necessarily want to see it go to the graveyard and then just be activated to tag out into a different incantation, but at the same time, he doesn't really want it to resolve either. There are a couple of particularly interesting lines, and it looks like he indicates here that the Magister is going to activate. Now, I didn't know that Magister had a quick effect. I mean, these things are books. How are you supposed to memorize the entirety of them? But for those of you at home, here's what it is. It can activate as a quick by removing some spell counters from your side of the field to summon a monster that can have spell counters put on it from deck. Now, this is an extreme problem because that monster will have been special summoned from the main deck, not the extra deck, so my Unicore will not turn it off. He's going to get another copy of Endymion, which unfortunately will have counters available. I'm going to shuffle his deck real quick and reveal the Unicore, blanking the entirety of the board sans this copy of Jackal King and this copy of Endymion that has just been freshly summoned. That throws a huge wrench in my plans. I had really only hoped to have to account for one of those two. My opponent's going to activate the effect of the Evil Swarm. I say, I have no response to that, to which I indicate that there is actually effect text on Unicore. Yeah, it's pretty broken. If I had to guess, I'd say that's why this card is still limited. To those of you who work for Konami and are watching this video, I know you are, because who wouldn't be a fan of me? Please unlimit Unicore. There's no reason for it to still be at 1. Alright, so they're going to think real quick. Oh, it's very difficult to assess the situation if you're on the receiving end of a Unicore and half of your board that you just invested your entire hand into is now blanked. But from my position, it's still looking pretty good for my opponent. There's not a lot I can do. You can see one more incantation in my hand alongside a Preparation of Rites and a Saphira. Saphira, unfortunately, is really, really bad at this stage in the game. We're going to activate Preparation of Rites, and God, I really want this to resolve. Unfortunately, they're going to activate the effect of Endymion, the one that was summoned from deck, and as a result, I will have to send it to the graveyard. Our turn isn't all the way over. We do have the ability to get one more incantation. Incantation Inception doesn't necessitate your incantation be on field. You can send one from your hand to the graveyard, and this Bookstone that's rotting in our grip is the perfect candidate. Now, worth noting that Endymion can negate spell and trap effects as well as their activations. So if at any point later in the set I'm aiming to use the effect of Incantation Inception, we may have a problem. Now, I want to go for something like Talismandra here. There are a lot of Brionac lines that go into Colossalist that could really pay off in a big way, but unfortunately my opponent still has monster negation available in the Jackal King. They're going to read Incantation Inception real quickly, and God, if it didn't destroy, I could at least go into Saphira. Maybe it's even worth not activating the effect here, just to get some kind of crash in. Instead, I elect to do so. I figure high rolling is probably the only way I'm going to win, and making my opponent think I have something that I don't is more important than going for the low-risk scenario. Instead, they call my bluff and take a couple of counters off of their Jackal King, stranding me with very few monsters remaining. Well, the Unicore, if nothing else, can walk over this copy of Appaloosa, which means that's 2 fewer negates I have to worry about next turn, but unfortunately there's now 2 Spell and Trap negates, the Book of Mooner, and this copy of Jackal King staring me in the face. So we get to do a fair amount of damage here, because of course Appaloosa goes all the way down to 0 while Unicore is on board. I believe it's like Chimera Tech and a negated effect. Alright, and that's really it from us. There's not much else we can do. Again, we really needed one of those 2 Preparation of Rites to find exactly Chalice Slime to have any hope of popping off with this hand, but we just weren't able to. My opponent's going to take a quick look at his graveyard. It is stacked with spells. Ooh, and what is that off the top? Looks like a good one. He's going to set the Magister, of course, and then afterwards decide how far he wants to go. Now, of course, he could push for lethal here, but there's a possibility I have something like a Necroz of Valkyrus in my hand. I don't know how I'd be activating it with no Necroz cards in graveyard, but something like an attack into a Unicore followed by a Valkyrus effect might be sufficient to end the turn. Regardless, he decides it's better just to go to battle step. With 2 cards in my hand and nothing on my side of the field, he's probably favored in a long game, and dragging this game out as long as possible is definitely in his interest. I'm taking a ton of damage here, and honestly, after that first turn setup failed, I should have scooped. I would have bought myself at least 5-10 more minutes and gotten into a more equitable Game 3 instead of one where I'm playing against the clock. Having said that, even making it to Game 3 from this perspective looks unlikely. Based on how this one's going, I don't think this is a very good matchup. I'll draw for turn and... oh, a Saravius? Is that what that is? Okay, so a Pensaplume isn't terrible. I can activate it. Unfortunately, I don't know if my opponent's going to allow it to resolve. They've got a negate on their side of the field, but notably only 1 monster one. There's 2 spell ones, which is bad news for the ritual deck, and unfortunately for me, they're not hard once per turns, so both of them can activate over the course of the turn. I'm shortcutting a little bit here. I go for the Incantation Talismandra and then activate its effect. Of course, the card I'm going to get is Brionac if I am so allowed. With 1 card in hand, Trishula is in my sights, but I don't think it's very likely I'm going to make it that far. My opponent's going to think real quickly, ooh, 9 stars on your side of the field, how interesting. So if I were to, say, go Brionac into Trishula, I could just activate Incantation Inception and pop off. They're indicating an activation of the Evil Swarm monster. Wow, this is such a cool rank 4. As Pendulum has kind of accidentally started to end on rank 4s, they've been trying to find ones that are good blind. Abyss Dweller is fine, but in a lot of matchups does absolutely nothing. Something like an Evil Swarm monster occasionally takes the wind out of its opponent's sails, even if it's a little off meta. I'm thinking real quickly about what I want to add. Of course, there's also an argument for going for something like a Shinobird. If that effect is allowed to resolve, I certainly would be able to tuck all of my opponent's monsters, but I don't think it's very likely that it will. Getting something like a Brionac isn't very sexy, but it does allow me to go for a cycle play later if I draw into it. Alright, so we'll be activating Incantation Inception now. I am going to call the bluff on my opponent, and they take it. Of course, the best case scenario for me is this Brionac is able to be summoned to the field, and then I can activate its effect to tuck a bunch of monsters that were summoned from the extra deck. That effect would never resolve, of course, because my opponent has a copy of Jackal King on their side of the field. Instead, I'm putting the onus on them and forcing them to negate the activation of my Incantation Inception. If they do, which they did, I'm now free to activate it from graveyard to get a more effective stat line. It's at this point that I realize, oh my god, this thing can negate spell effects too? Are you kidding me? They're able to return the other Endymion with their first Endymion, negate the graveyard effect of Incantation Inception, and leave me with a hand that does almost nothing. I can go Brionac here, but if they negate it with the Jackal King, as they do, I'm out of options. They know the remaining card in my hand is Saravius, so there's nothing for them to be scared of, and as long as they clear the field of incantations next turn and I don't top deck into one, they should have this game. I don't know how keen I am to play it out, so I go ahead and concede. Let's go to Game 2. So for Game 2, our hand is a lot better. You can see we've got a couple of unfair cards in our grip. Of course, Pendulum is an extremely explosive deck, and probably the only way we're going to be able to keep up with our opponent is by doing some things that are questionably ethical. You can see a trap card on the far left of my hand. One guess as to what that is. We're leading with a copy of Candle here, and this is frustrating. I want to be drawing into something like a Pensaplume or a Bookstone, because those are the cards whose effects I'm unlikely to activate. Over the course of the turn, I want to activate something like a Talismandra and a Candle, but activating one of their hand effects means that I'm turning off their secondary. We're going to go for Talismandra here, and what I get should telegraph what kind of game this is going to be. The Talismandra will be searching a Saravius, and if you're not searching something for next turn's setup, or something to enable a broken turn 1 play, it means that your hand likely has a special summon floodgate that you are going to protect with your life. I will tribute these two monsters like I was playing the Dragonoid Generator deck, set 1 card, and pass it back to my opponent. Like it or not, this is the best start for the deck. For turn, my opponent's going to draw, and ooh, that Lava Golem looks pretty sus when I have a special summon floodgate and only 1 monster on my side of the field. It looks like they're thinking about setting 1 and passing, and that's just what they do. They'll pick up my monster to read it. Yeah, it says you can't special summon. A little bit broken. Probably should not be legal, if I'm being honest. We'll just go to battle phase. It's Purple Poison. What a fantastic out. And this is why we get Saravius, folks. Even though we're in the damage step, the effect of Saravius negates activations of effects that target, and as a result, we're able to activate it in response. My opponent can't set their whole hand, can they? Gosh, I certainly hope not. Is that a second Purple Poison? Oh, God. Well, here they're going to do something extremely spicy. I had no idea this was how this worked. I'm going to look at my hand and, ooh, there's a lot of spells in there. I'm going to have to start setting them. I'll activate pre-prep, and then my opponent will remind me that Anti-Spell Fragrance is reciprocal. I add it back to my hand and then say, no, I already played it. You know what it is. Let's attack. Now, when Magister is destroyed, it goes to the Pendulum Zone. But I have Anti-Spell up. So I'm not exactly certain that that's what happens. You know, why are you able to activate a card by putting it in your Pendulum Zone when I have a card that says you can't activate spell cards? I call the judge over, but it turns out you're not actually activating this card when it's sent to the graveyard. You're activating an effect that places it face up in your spell and trap card zone, even though there's no activation that's happening. The judge comes over to confirm, and my opponent reveals to me that this is an exceptionally spicy way he's won a significant amount of duels. I don't understand how he's going to fill the other zone, however, so I'm not very upset about it. There's now going to be 1 of them that I have to worry about, but in order to get counters on them, they're going to have to activate 3 spells in 1 turn, which doesn't seem very likely, and putting a card on their side of the field puts them very susceptible to Trish, should I ever find a way to make her. Right here, the judge is chastising me for being bad at my job and not able to read, but I get that a lot, so I'm prepared for it. My opponent's going to normal summon on their turn a copy of Purple Poison, and yikes, looks like the fix is in. Well, we had a good run, but now my opponent's going to be able to special summon. Thankfully, they aren't going to be able to set Scales, which is arguably more important for the deck. It doesn't look like there's a lot they can do with this hand other than set a Pendulum Call and then pass it back, hoping for the best. We've got a pre-preparation of Rights set, which is likely much better, but if you'd look at our grip, you'd see that we actually already have both the Shinobird Ritual and the Saphira Ritual. So our only legal target is a new addition to the deck, a little suspect and a little off-meta, but it's Lord of the Red. Now, Lord of the Red's good for a ton of reasons. The deck is aching for something to play going first blind, and Saphira, I love her, but routinely she's just terrible. Lord of the Red at the very least is Disruption. He's 2 pops over the course of the turn if you manage your effects correctly, and I like those odds. Now, of course, we aren't going to be able to summon him this turn because summoning anything requires a spell card activation, and some idiot put Anti-Spell Fragrance on his side of the field. I'm going to look at the graveyard real quick. Yeah, nothing going on in there. I guess I will pass back. Now, our hand looks pretty good. Alongside these spells and the couple of ritual monsters we've picked up over the last few turns, we also have an Ash Blossom that will answer this copy of Pendulum Call quite nicely when my opponent decides to go for it. You may have seen the one creeping monster in my opponent's grip, a Lava Golem, and God forbid they ever figure out a way to get it onto my side of the field. Alright, they're going to look at their hand real quickly, but I don't think they have another option. It's time to go for the Pendulum Call, sir. Discarding really anything from this hand feels pretty good. The Duelist Alliance going to the graveyard had to feel great until I activated Ash. Yikes! Still, it's a very slow direction to get to the second copy of Pend Call. You'd have to set it and then set the Pend Call next turn. To start my turn, I'll activate Preparation of Rights, which is great. Just a fantastic activation. It's going to allow me to get both a relevant ritual from my deck alongside potentially a ritual spell from my graveyard. I don't think I have any, but, you know, nice to know. I'm thumbing over Bryanak here. It's hard not to pick Bryanak, but, you know, I won't even be able to summon Trish this turn. It will be at least a turn until something happens. I go back, and the other relevant target would be Chalice Slime, which I end up picking. Chalice Slime enables a whole bunch of really powerful plays, not a ton of which are available under Anti-Spell Fragrance. Still, it's probably fine. We'll activate Chalice Slime, and then think about which we are going to summon from deck. Now, summoning a Talismandra here gets us Bryanak. That's quite strong. My opponent already fiddling with their hand, knowing that there's going to be a Trish this turn. Don't worry, that set card isn't Necroz Mirror. You're going to have to wait at least a turn for that. So we're going to thumb through the deck, and I don't know what to get exactly. While I want Bryo, I end up settling on Ben 10. Here's the theory behind it. I need fodder, and I know I'm about to tribute this copy of Talismandra. Tributing a Ben 10 as well means I get to activate the effect of Ben 10 and go plus. It is not until I tribute the Talismandra and the Ben 10 that I realize, wait, how did I start this game? Did it involve a Vanity's Fiend? Do I have Saphira in my hand already? Uh-oh. Well, because of that, we are not going to be able to search anything. Using Ben 10's effect, trigger the effect of Lord of the Red to pop my opponent's Magister, and then I very shamefully realize, no, I don't have any targets. That's an illegal activation. Keep your card for now. I'm not very beat up because we have another copy of Anti-Spell Fragrance in our hand, and we're able to pop our opponent's card in their draw step should we so choose. Our opponent's going to read Lord of the Red real quickly. Yeah, it's an impressively powerful card. It's 2 Tridents. The problem is it both lacks a home right now, and unfortunately is not particularly good in terms of protection. We'll activate Anti-Spell Fragrance, then trigger the effect of Lord of the Red, popping our opponent's remaining scale. They'll set 1 card and pass it back to us. This is looking pretty good. As long as I'm activating effects, I can keep ahead of my opponent. I'm going to lead with the effect of Chalice Slime in my hand. We'll discard one of the many errant spells that litter our grip, and then enter this tank of a deck. There's not a ton of incantations remaining. You can see we've got a Pensilver, and I've pulled, I believe, a copy of Talismandra to the forefront. That's likely the card we're going to go for, but setting up a ritual spell play feels so terrible when we're not able to activate our spells. I settle on a Candle, and then I'll activate both the effect of Candle and the effect of Lord of the Red, which pops another Magister and puts it in the spell and trap card zone. We'll get Hymn of Light here, because we have the Saphira in our grip already. But we won't be able to activate it this turn. At the very least, if this Hymn of Light finds its way into the graveyard, we'll be able to protect the Lord of the Red, should it go. I'm going to allow my opponent to cut the deck real quick and get in for 2400. This has Red Eye's stats. It's okay. We're going to look at the grip one last time and unfortunately take 2500 points of damage because we cannot conduct a ritual summon, which Talismandra requires you do, lest you be punished. Our opponent's health is looking particularly low, and their hand is not looking particularly good. They'll draw for turn. It's a Time Gazer Magician. They laugh to themselves a little bit, and then say, do you want to see the spice? To which, of course, I reply, of course, lay it on me. They tribute both of my monsters to give me a Lava Golem in defense position. Take that, Duel Links! Now, unfortunately, they don't have, you know, a really good out to the Lava Golem, but it's fun while it lasted. They'll pass it back to me. I'll look at my hand real quick and think, okay, well, I guess I will switch the Lava Golem to attack position and get in. I'll attack, and my opponent says, yeah, actually, let's go to Game 3. So for Game 3, we don't have much time left, and this is where my hubris comes into play. If I'd only conceded Game 1 with a couple extra minutes, we might be able to turn this around. Now, unfortunately, my opponent is going first. I've boarded into a number of unfair cards, as one does when they have to go second against Pendulum, but my opponent has an entire turn to set up. You know, there's really nothing I can do to insulate myself against the multitude of negates if he finds them. There's Master Cerberus, the perfect Ash target. If only I had it, this game would be over, but I don't. Of course, Master Cerberus can easily tag in a Jackal King, who in turn can tag back into Master Cerberus, making one of the 2 requisite parts for Electromite. What I love about the Mythical Beast engine is not only are they negates, they also turbo you to your linear play. So powerful. They'll go into a Master Cerberus and then look at the hand real quick. It's not fantastic, but it's got a Pendulum Call and an Allure of Darkness in it. There are very many scenarios in which it bricks, but I think they're pretty few and far between. They're going to lead with an Allure of Darkness, feels bad before the spell counter monsters are on their side of the field, and then accidentally draw 3 cards. Judge! You can take the first 2. And it looks like it's a Dark Worm and what appears to be an Endymion, though I'm not particularly well versed in what exactly the Pendulum monsters look like. I'm not racist against Pendulum monsters, they just all look the same. They're going to look at the grip real quick and, I wish I could describe the face that he was making when he selected Black Fang Magician. He really wanted this card to stay in the hand, but eventually decides that it needs to be banished. Putting a lot of faith into his ability to find a high scale later, but I don't think that's too far outside the realm of possibility. Of course, this puts counters on Master Cerberus, like they will stay there. Now the hand is looking pretty good, provided he can special summon this copy of Dark Worm. Unfortunately, using Pen Call to ditch it, while powerful, doesn't work when you have a monster on your side of the field. He'll activate Dark Worm's effect to get the 0 regardless, and accidentally show a copy of what appears to be Mist Valley Apex Avian in doing so. I start cracking up at this point. Knowing that there's Avians in the deck makes that first game blowout just that much more impressive. So, of course, these two will become Electromite, as they usually do. Electromite, in this particular case, will likely have to send a very specific scale to the top of the extra deck, because otherwise there's no guarantee you have them if this Pendulum Call gets negated. He's going to play it safe and go for the Magister here. And then, as most Pendulum players do, will likely set the gate 0, destroy it with this copy of Electromite, and tag it back out. Interestingly enough, that appears to be Endymion? Well, that's an arguable play when you have a Magister face up in your extra deck, and of course it's going to be put on your side of the field momentarily. If you're able to activate the effect of Magister post-Pendulum, you might be golden, and wow, what a rip off the top, a Pot of Desires. Alright, we'll set Magister here and fire it off. Things are looking particularly bad for my competitive prospects. The Pendulum Call comes out. Again, I have no Ash, so there's nothing I can do, and they're going to go ahead and get 2 Spellcaster monsters. There's Purple Poison, and there's Harmonizing Magician. You know, this card at this point could just read Get Purple Poison and Harmonizing and effectively be the same card. Errata when? After that, let's fire off this copy of Pot of Desires. What do you think? Now, first we'll activate this copy of Purple Poison before firing it off, and, oh boy. He'll shuffle real quick, and every Garnet in the deck. Please, I want Time Gazer in that pile. At least. There's not too much I can banish this late in the combo, but it looks like I didn't get a ton that's relevant. Double Apex Avian, which is something. At least that's a card I won't have to worry about for the foreseeable future. He reveals them to me, too. Good sport. He'll draw a couple of cards off the top, and oh boy, is that a Called by the Grave? Well, it's pretty late, but it should still do the trick. Okay, well now this Magister is on 3. We should be able to perform a particularly potent Pendulum Summon, followed by a Magister activation for an Endymion. I don't like the way this is shaking out. With this amount of scales, it's possible he could even activate the effect of Magister before the Pendulum Summon even occurs. He's checking his face-down banished cards real quick, seeing what's tutorable from the extra deck, and yeah, there's a lot that's good in there. The graveyard's plentiful, but of course they're all spell cards. There's no monsters to speak of. It looks like he is going to go for the Magister play, and oh boy, anything but Endymion, and oh, well, okay, another monster negate isn't really going to matter too much. There's already going to be about 15 on his side of the field by the time he's done. He's got 1 remaining zone from the extra, thinking real quick. Okay, there's Sork. That's the high scale. Will we be performing a Pendulum Summon? He's thumbing over a couple of copies of cards in his hand, and it looks like we are. Pendulum Summoning 3, including Endymion. Ah, dang it. Well, okay, we're going to have to contend with a lot this game, but I don't think it's undeniable. He's revealing the Called by the Grave in the hand just to show he had all Ds. Well, from here it should be an easy Link summon and Xyz summon into a couple of potent monsters, but it's at this point he reveals, oh no wait, there's not enough arrows. He needs a particular arrow so that Harmonizing and Purple Poison can overlay for his favorite rank 4 monster, and as a result will likely have to perform at least a Link summon before anything else can occur. As I see him thumb over the Endymion, I go, yes, 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 please make Apollousa, and there she is. Wait. These are all monster negates. For the eagle-eyed of you, you may realize that I have a particular card in my hand that's going to make this very frustrating for my opponent. They're going to look very quickly at their face-up extra deck, and, well, there's not a whole lot they can do from this position. They'll finally overlay into the Evil Swarm once again, before setting a copy of Called by the Grave and passing turn. I cannot believe my luck. This was a full combo that's manifested in some very manageable monsters. None of these cards interact with what I plan to do, which is the Robbie special. I'm going to go Standby Main, telegraphing, I don't know, Pot of Extravagance, and then the word that no duelist wants to hear, battle, followed by the second most frightening word, end of battle? Oof! And there it is. Well, they're going to go ahead and banish down. It is hard to tell what they're going to keep, but knowing what my deck does, they make the, I believe, correct decision of keeping Purple Poison Magician on their side of the field. Doing that means if I aim to make Vanity's Ruler over the course of the turn, which, spoiler, I do, then they'll be able to potentially remove it with the effect of Purple Poison if I'm not able to manage the Saravius. Now, with the hand that already includes a very potent piece of targeted disruption, it's unlikely I have the extenders necessary to do so, and they're correct. While I do have a ton of cards in my hand, I can't make both Saravius and Vanity's Ruler, so I'll have to settle for one of them. Well, of course, it's main phase 2, so we won't be able to do any damage, and the clock is ticking. We're both at 8,000. I'll activate the effect of Brionac. Now, Brionac can do a lot here, but what I'm going to go for is Colossalus, which you likely see a lot, turning into Necroz Mirror to get Trishula fodder. Unfortunately, I don't have Trishula in mind. There's not a card in my opponent's hand, for example, and more importantly, I need a way to tribute a Benten. In order to do that, I'm going to have to get Cycle here, which can bring back the Brionac from the graveyard. There it is. And at this point, I'm playing about as fast as I can. Remember, I'm not very smart, and as a result, it takes me a little while to think of the extremely powerful lines available in this deck. We've drawn Bookstone, thank goodness a bad one, which allows us to special summon a copy of Talismandra from deck and add a Benten to hand. After that, we can use Cycle in order to tribute Benten to bring this Brionac back, and then trigger the effect of Benten, adding a copy of Vanity's Ruler to our grip. Because we have 2 incantations on our side of the field, we'll be able to tribute them both for the Vanity's Ruler, and while we don't have access to a Saravius, we do have the ability to stonewall our opponent off of special summons. That should be good enough, right? We'll go ahead and allow our opponent to cut, and provided they find anything but a Dark Spellcaster, we should be in the clear. If they do find a Dark Spellcaster, we might be in a little bit of trouble, because they'll be able to do exactly 100 points of damage. I go to battle phase, and they remind me that Evenly Matched actually has text on it, and it is now their turn. They'll draw, and what do they find off the top but a Time Gazer Magician? This has got to be the most happy any individual who has ever drawn Time Gazer has ever been. A Dark Spellcaster. What more can you want? It does out my board, and more importantly, it deals 100 damage to me, which will win in time. This is not good for me. They're going to look at the card in the hand and go, well, I mean, this does do it, right? There's no way that I lose this game, provided I'm able to go to battle phase. So they're going to think about it real quick. Potentially there's some line that allows it to extend into multiple monsters, but, I mean, it doesn't look like it. He shrugs his shoulders and says, yeah, I mean, I guess I'll normal summon Time Gazer Magician. I go, can I please read this card? Okay, sure. Yes, it is a Dark Spellcaster. Let's go to combat. He attacks into my Brionac, and I activate Necroz of Valkyris. This is Battle Fader, for those of you that are unfamiliar, and as a result, prevents him from going to damage calculation and activating the effect of Purple Poison. I should still be in the clear, provided I'm able to take my next turn. But the clock is ticking down. We are literal seconds from time. I go to main phase 1. I've got a Gale Dogra in hand, and thank God I do not summon it. I go to my hand trying to figure out what will out this purple poison. I have several different ways that involve Shinobirds, but I'm not confident summoning Gale Dogra this close to time, and time is called. Well, a fantastic duel and a good reminder to scoop early.